the president is trying to distance himself today from the send her back chants aimed at Congresswoman Ilhan Omar that broke out at his rally in North Carolina Wednesday night. And even as he says he disagrees with the chants inspired by his own tweets and actions, the moment left many questioning the future of the Republican Party and whether this is the new normal. But as Tim Alberta notes in his new book, American Carnage, there were signs nearly a decade ago that Republican voters were craving this kind of unconventional, offensive rhetoric. That sign was Sarah Palin. Quote, even as Democrats ran away with the election of 2008, Palin's appeal was a revelation. She was connecting with portions of the electorate in ways that nobody had seen since Reagan. But unlike the Gipper, she was not channeling their hopes and ambitions and highest aspirations. Instead, she was provoking their fears, fanning their anxieties, inciting their animosities, and it worked. Tim Alberta, the author of American Carnage and senior political correspondent at Politico, back with me. Tim, again, this book is stunning. I highly recommend it. Karl Rove says that Sarah Palin was, quote, an early warning bell for what we're seeing now. I think many of us forgot it. And then we read your pages and it's a, wow, the Sarah Palin, Ted Nugent, Kid Rock trifecta joined us a decade ago.
Yeah, Stephanie, it's really tempting to believe that Donald Trump just materialized out of thin air and that nobody saw this coming. But in fact, as I try to do in the book, in reconstructing this past decade of Republican politics, and of course, I should say that one could argue that this goes back much farther than a decade, but just looking at this decade in American politics, Sarah Palin was a harbinger of something. And obviously there is a great deal of irony in the fact that John McCain, the late senator who was arguably the most outspoken critic in the Republican Party of Donald Trump's and was constantly rebuking him for his rhetoric, which he found to be offensive and racist and unbecoming of the highest office in the land, John McCain planted this seed in many ways by selecting Sarah Palin as his... Well, look, I don't want to climb inside of his head, obviously, but the fact of the matter is that he had only spent a sum total of a couple of hours with Sarah Palin before he chose to put her on the ticket and arguably and potentially put her one heartbeat away from the presidency of the United States. So obviously John McCain, late in his life, just before he died, expressed regret over picking Sarah Palin, I think probably for that reason, among others. But Sarah Palin, what she did, Stephanie, was she exposed this gulf between sort of the Republican governing class, the Chamber of Commerce, country club, upscale Republican, and a lot of these more conservative, rural and non-college educated, blue-collar, working-class Republicans who felt as though the party's elite looked down on them and who felt as though the party's elite ignored them, that they were ignorant to their economic troubles, to some of their cultural anxieties. And we knew that this was sort of simmering below the surface, but never had we seen it explode the way that it did as when Sarah Palin was introduced to the national ticket. And really, in so many ways, you can draw a straight line between her rhetoric and her appeal in 2008 and Donald Trump's 8 years later.
Then where does the country club Republican go? Do they go visit the Bush Library and golfing with Paul Ryan? Because the current Republican Party has stuck by the president's side for so many of these moments. Charlottesville, S-hole countries, and then, of course, this week. All of that being the case, what does it mean for the future of the party?
Look, it's a great question. And as I said a minute ago, there is this theory, obviously, that people around the president believe, and it bears out to a great extent, which is that voters are are ultimately going to act in their self-interest. They're going to act on what affects them, not on what offends them. But there's a breaking point, obviously, here, Stephanie, and there's a real, existential question about if you are a Republican, Donald Trump's going to come and go, right? But these forces that produced Sarah Palin, these forces that produced Donald Trump, they will still remain. And what does the party do when he is out of office? There is going to have to be a reckoning, obviously, because the country is changing. The country is undergoing this sweeping, unprecedented demographic transformation. And the RNC autopsy that said after Romney's defeat in 2012 that, hey, we can't win elections with just white voters, Donald Trump crumpled up that autopsy. He threw it in the trash can. But it still holds true. It's just a question of timing. Donald Trump might be able to assemble that coalition again in 2020 and win, but Republicans over the long term are not going to be able to win the presidency. They're not going to be able to win national elections by alienating a rapidly diversifying electorate. Everybody in the party understands that. The issue right now is that many of them are just too afraid of the president to speak out against him. They understand that it's not just tax cuts and deregulation and conservative justices, which they all like. If you're a Republican elected official, you don't want to be the next Jeff Flake. You don't want to be the next Mark Sanford. You don't want to be the next Justin Amash, who's forced to leave the party because you understand that if you speak out against Trump, you are putting your career on the line.
Except, of course, you run for office representing that party because, in theory, you represent their values. I want to share a scene in the book where you highlight different reactions to the president's 2016 victory, and this one stood out to us. You write, when a friend texted South Carolina's governor, Nikki Haley, expressing dismay at the night's outcome, she replied, "Cheer up. We just won governor's races in Vermont, Indiana, and North Dakota." She, of course, then went on to work for the Trump administration. But what do you think was behind her reaction and then her going to the White House?
Well, I think what was behind it is a combination of what was behind it for so many other Republicans. I think that obviously there's a great deal of discomfort with Donald Trump, to put it mildly, for a lot of these folks. But then he wins the presidency, and a lot of them think, look, this is sort of a binary choice at this point. Either I get in line and I try to have some influence over this administration, and I try to help, keep this thing on the rails, as Paul Ryan liked to say, basically keep the ship from sinking, or I wash my hands of it, I walk away, and I keep my reputation intact, and I can look at myself in the mirror every morning, but I know that maybe there's something that could have been done in this administration by somebody like me, and instead they've got the third stringers in there who are not going to keep the president in line. That is the calculation a lot of people like Nikki Haley made. I'm not saying it's the right calculation. I'm just trying to put you in their shoes. And obviously, look, Nikki Haley now, talk about the future of the Republican Party and where we go after Trump. People like Nikki Haley have this fascinating three-dimensional chess move in front of them here, Stephanie, because they have to simultaneously figure out how to harness some of Trump's populist appeal, some of that appeal to the cultural conservative base of the party, the working class, blue-collar voter, while simultaneously moving beyond and even denouncing the president's appeal to xenophobia and racism and everything else, because Nikki Haley certainly understands better than most Republicans that you need a broader coalition to win elections.
And in the meantime, she is getting paid by corporate America, sitting on the board of directors for Boeing.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.